This relates to what Michael was saying about the almost mundane predictability of these patterns when you understand them. Like I called Trump winning the election in 2016 by February. The way I said it was, if Hillary gets the nomination for the Democrats, it's a slam dunk for Trump. And it was easy and I wasn't fretting about it, and I just saw it coming because I had seen how the political system works. And I understood that reality TV based on narcissism is going to give reality TV back to a culture based on narcissism. And so it did not surprise me in the least. Now here's one of the things that is a little interesting, is there's this mathematical biologist at the University of Connecticut named Peter Turchin, who studies cultural evolution. And he has been developing a global network of scholars to make history scientific and to be able to do mathematical studies with real historical, archaeological, and anthropological data. So they've been gathering data from lots of different kinds of societies, and then they look at their stability and their instability. And he looked for what is the measure, what is the observable data that you track to see when a society is about to collapse. And he found a very specific thing. He calls it elite overproduction. Elite overproduction happens when a society becomes so unequal that the most elite people in it are competing for such scarce positions and opportunities that they lose the ability to maintain coherent hierarchical control over the rest of the society, while the vast majority of people engage in rebellious, destabilizing activities, and the whole thing, as an old friend of mine says, the whole thing collapses like a wet taco. So what do you do when times are really polarized? Get ready. We're late stage collapse. What happens during late stage collapse? Hint number one, it's almost definitely not what you're thinking. What happens during a natural disaster? What happens when a hurricane hits a city? What happens when there are fires like in Paradise, California last year? The answer is a tremendous outpouring of pro-social, generous, cooperative behavior. And there are characteristic psychological responses in the heat of the moment. Some people get paralyzed and distracted. Some people become heroes. Some people engage in really strategic actions. Others have no clue what to do. Others get caught in stampedes and get crushed. So the question is less, how do I stop this? And more, how do I prepare myself to respond regeneratively in those stressful moments? How do I be, as our friend Bob Stoker would say, how do I be a regenerative responder? Which is a program that just started in Paradise, California about 2 months ago, where they're doing permaculture projects to re-envision Paradise, the city that burned in flames. I mean, it was like Hollywood was looking for the name of that town to burn it down. It's such a good story. 27,000 people in the town. So the question is less, what do I do about all this polarization? How do we fix it? The causes are so deep. And the root cause for that polarization is population pressure.
Exactly.
The root cause is that there are too many people fighting over too scarce of resources in a system that is inherently complex enough to be gameable, that the wealth hoarders have done so much wealth hoarding that the whole thing's going down as it's currently structured. You're not going to fix that. What you can fix is how you build those virtuous cycles of regeneration among the people you're connected with, and spiral them up to the appropriate scale, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on tonight and again on Tuesday, which the appropriate scale is the bioregion, which is the functional landscape mapped to shared cultural identity. So we can talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But if you think you're going to stop the polarization, it's not going to happen. Especially with so many billions of dollars being spent on propaganda to perpetuate it by the people who have already won the wealth hoarding game. So we have to do something different.
So there's something that I want to offer. This is going to take 3 or 4 minutes. There's something I'd like to offer as a way of helping us to understand our times. And this is one of the most insightful pieces of wisdom that has made the biggest difference in our life, Connie's and my life, in the last 4 years. And it has to do with what our great mentor, William Catton, the author of Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change, which is the single most important book we've ever read, calls the fundamental, unfathomed predicament of humanity. So this is the main predicament, and it's unfathomed. Most people don't see it, they don't know it. And it builds on exactly what you were saying. So, the Europeans had already reached saturation. They were already experiencing population pressure and all of its effects in terms of social tension, wars, conflicts, all kinds of things. And then, and the denuding of the forests and the soil washing away. And there were serious problems in Europe. And then an entire new hemisphere was discovered. Now, of course, it was fully occupied, but it was discovered from the European perspective, and they had the tools and the weapons and the technology to make more use of the environment than the indigenous peoples were. In fact, from the European perspective, they were, the indigenous people here were just sort of animals. They were just not making use of the land. And because of the bacteria, the bugs, the diseases, the germs that went ahead of most of the Europeans, often perpetuated by dirty blankets and things like that, most Europeans didn't have to interact with the indigenous of this North, Central, and South America because 90% of them died because of the diseases. So from the European perspective, it appeared to be an uninhabited continent full of resources that Europe had not seen in 1,800 years or longer. And the Middle East hadn't seen in 3,000 or 4,000 years. Timber, unbelievable trees. Animals of every possible kind and kinds you couldn't fathom, but you could tell were food. And then when we discovered coal, oil, and natural gas, which North America is rich in. So from the European perspective, 2 things happened. One is that there was a tremendous relieving of population pressure because millions of people came to this continent, which relieved the population pressure in Europe. Plus, all these resources were being, this is the way colonialism works, was sent over to Europe, which relieved the population pressure. So there was an expectation, not just an expectation, an assumption of limitlessness. That North America, everything was possible. And because if you combine human ingenuity with enough energy, and we had so much petroleum and coal, you combine the 2 things. One, the discovery of the New World, and then the second was the discovery of these stored hydrocarbons, this stored energy that we could burn. Those 2 things created the unfathomed predicament of humanity, and it's this. The mindset and institutions that emerged in America especially, but Canada too, but mostly in America, the mindset and institutions that emerged here reflected a sense of limitlessness, limitless possibilities. I mean, there was everything that emerged here during the 19th and 20th centuries reflected this sense of limitlessness. And then we shipped that mindset and those institutions all over the world. So the people in India and China and Bangladesh and everywhere, Brazil, they expect, and this is what our media, the global media is selling them, that eventually they can live like middle-class Americans. And yet it would take 10 planets of resources to provide that much and to absorb that much waste. It can't happen. Yet that's the expectations. So the fundamental predicament of humankind is that we have an actual world of carrying capacity deficit. That is, we don't have enough resources and energy. Yet we have mindset and expectations and institutions that reflect carrying capacity surplus because they emerged when we had more than enough. And the interesting, painful thing for progressives and liberals when they learn it, and I expect that if what I'm about to say you haven't already heard, you're probably going to deny or feel angry towards me by even saying it. I did the first time I heard this.
was that in times of carrying capacity surplus, expanding economies, expanding civilizations, growing empires, liberal values predominate. And it's easy to see why. The pie is growing bigger. You can be more generous. And then when the shift happens and you reach carrying capacity, and now you're in carrying capacity deficit, you're in declining economies, declining everything, conservative values tend to predominate. Because the pie is shrinking, and everybody, all the in-groups, all the former fighting that used to happen, this group, and their centuries-long animosity towards this group, but those sort of soothe over in expanding economic times. But when the times shift and contraction comes, and resource scarcity comes, and energy scarcity and density, all that, then what happens is these long-standing feuds come to surface again. And we start seeing these dividing lines, and people pull back their in-group, out-group sense. Because we all innately have a sense of in-group, the people who we can trust and be kind with and generous with, and out-group, the people who you're not sure about or you downright dislike. And the challenge for those of us who are progressives and liberals is that we grew up in a time of carrying capacity surplus, and we've been involved in incredible social justice and ecological and peace and all kinds of really important, cool stuff. And then in our lifetime, it shifted. And that's the most difficult time. If you're born and you live your whole life in expanding times, life is cool, life's great. If you're born and live your whole life in times of contraction, well, that's just reality. You just accept it. The most difficult, emotional, painful time is when you're born in times of carrying capacity surplus. And in your lifetime it shifts. And now you're in contraction, you're in decline, you're in collapse. And collapse isn't this. The collapse of the Roman Empire took 325 years. It was this, with partial recoveries. That's the way it happens. So the fact that you're seeing schisms, dividing lines, polarization, not just here, but everywhere, is one of those things that, A, when you understand it, then you can be engaged with it, not from a place of frustration, but from a place of understanding. And then you can actually be potentially more effective in dealing with that because you're doing the kind of thing Joseph was just saying in terms of what are the how can you as a congregation, how can you as small communities, and how can you as individuals sort of strengthen the muscle. Hey, y'all call yourself buff, right? All right, it's time to get buff with regenerative generosity. Oh, that's good. Buff with regenerative generosity. I like it.
So I have annoyed a lot of my friends because I have a big Facebook following, and I used to study memetics, the spread of ideas as they propagate across social systems, and I would watch the dysfunctional aspects of memes as they would spread on social media. So I would see my friends saying, the Me Too hashtag has gone everywhere, so we're going to bring down patriarchy, and I was like, do you not realize that there are 10 million fragmented groups on Facebook alone? And all you see are the ones who feel the way you do? So you're not seeing the whole world. You don't see the increasing patriarchal, sexist vitriol that is polarizing right alongside you. And it's because of the fragmentation of that media landscape that keeps us from seeing it. I was just talking with Michael earlier today about how I was reading Edward Wilson, E.O. Wilson's amazing book, Sociobiology, which came out in 1975, of a first edition copy. And I started reading, and the first example that he gave of how you could study social behavior in biologically robust ways is he gave the example of baboons. He said, you know, people used to think baboons are aggressive, and the males are dominant, and they fight and kill each other. They will engage in infanticide and kill the offspring of females so that they can only raise their own offspring. But then they started seeing other baboon populations that were egalitarian and peaceful and showed none of those behaviors. Do you know what the difference was? Population density. You had a critical threshold of population density. When there were a small number of baboons with plenty of resources, they were egalitarian and peaceful. There was a critical threshold. You get beyond a point where there are too many of them in a small area, and they begin to fight and form dominance hierarchies. It's an environmental condition driving the behavior. And they used to say it was in nature. The nature of baboons is to be violent and aggressive. No, the nature of baboons is to have a repertoire of responses that are well adapted to diverse environments. In times of scarcity, it is adaptive for those that can fight and win against the other males to control resources. It is adaptive. Their genes propagate. In low population density and times of abundance, it is adaptive to cooperate. And so, this question about what is human nature fails to recognize if we say humans are aggressive, humans are dominant, humans are more adaptive, more flexible than any other animal in the history of the earth, and our ability to adapt ourselves to different environments. And so our nature is adaptability. But we have to understand how we adapt to our environments. Because when we understand that, we can design our environments. And this gets into regenerative design.
And that's really what permaculture, agroecology, let's just stay with permaculture. Permaculture has been an attempt for decades now to mimic the wisdom of the living world, to mimic the wisdom of nature, and then to adapt that, and then apply that in perhaps in new ways, so that we can actually live, once again, as indigenous peoples have known, in a mutually enhancing relationship with life.
There was this beautiful survey of research in public health where they asked all social ills in families like marital disputes and kids dropping out of high school and all these other kinds of problems in life. What is the root cause? What's common to all of them? And what they found was two things. The first, all human conflict arises from real or perceived coercion. So when you see conflict, there's either real or perceived coercion. So, that's just one of those subtle ones because it seems so simple. But if you reflect on conflicts in your life, it's ubiquitous. The second is that every time that people are successful in life, it's because they've cultivated two very specific competencies, which relates to what you do tomorrow, and it also relates to regenerative design. So the two human competencies associated with all manner of success in life: emotion regulation, the ability to have an emotional response and have the contemplative, reflective capacities to pause before acting, consider your feelings, and then act in alignment with your values. Emotion regulation is the buffer between punching someone because they anger you and thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. Emotion regulation is a fundamental skill. The second is psychological flexibility. The ability to take different perspectives and feel into them to see how they function as empathy, and then from that perspective, make effective decisions about how to be in relationship. If you cultivate these two basic abilities, you start to become pro-social. You start to engage in ways that increase social benefits for you and others. So this is the beginning of regenerative design, because the beginning of regenerative design is to cultivate these capacities among yourself and among others around you, so that you begin to work as groups with higher capacities of individuals in the group with higher group capacities at the same time. And at the session tomorrow that we're going to have, I'm going to share a framework called pro-social. We're going to walk through a little bit of it, which has a lot of specific tools and interventions to help do this, and it's one framework out of many that do it. But I just want to begin by saying that among the things that you want to start doing is increasing your capacity to regulate your emotions and take different perspectives so that you can engage strategically and effectively in relationships with other people. And that simple, amazingly human capacity is the root, the foundation of community resilience. And we can talk more about the ways that it scales up into other things, but it's a really fundamental piece.
Oh
I got this. The truth of the matter is the way that you soften the ideological hold is by being held by the nurturance of others. It really is that if you can form supporting relationships with people immediately around you, could be your family, your close friends, a group of like-minded people, then you can actually hold it for yourselves. But one of the key challenges we have right now is the problem of scale. We're living in a world so big and so complex, it's too big and too complex. And so we need a way to return to appropriate scale, where that softening can happen in a way that has societal consequences. And one of the things that I've been learning about as I've tried to answer the question, if collapse happens, what could be resilient, is to look back and see the size of human societies, or I like how you said cultures, because our word societies often has baggage in the Western tradition, what we mean by that. But when we see coherent, sustainable, long-lasting cultural systems of humans, they have a scale. Their scale is a functional landscape, like a watershed, a coastal estuary, a mountain range, an island. There's a scale of human subsistence. That scale is the extent to which, in the absence of fossil fuels, people can engage in effective communication and trade. So if you're here in the Pacific Northwest, you have all these rivers, you have the ocean, you have kayaks, you can have a fairly extensive trade network, fairly complex societies that can last for thousands of years. That scale maps onto the functions, the ecological functions of the landscape. Does it provide you with potable water? Does it produce the textiles and materials that you need? Are you able, within your social connections, to learn all of the skills that you need to learn to live a subsistence lifestyle in that environment? So this scale has been given a name in the 1960s and 1970s. It's actually a very old model. That scale is called the bioregion. And the thing about bioregions is that they have two kinds of definition which make them interesting. One of them is the functions of the landscape, which can be defined in fairly rigorous scientific and empirical terms. If I drop water here, which body of water does it go into? There's a drainage basin. And I can use the gravitational basin of pulling water down to define a watershed. So there is a scientific empirical piece. There's also a sociological and cultural piece, which is a shared identity of we are the people who live in this place. So there's been the Cascadia movement here in the Pacific Northwest to cultivate this cultural capacity that was nascent here and is definitely with the First Nations people here. So this idea of a bioregion is interesting because it achieves a balance between the maximum complexity of the human system, which allows for innovation, high-quality technology, and the sharing of social knowledge to stabilize across the region, while also maintaining the highest levels of ecological capacity in the same region. What's interesting is that in permaculture, there's this concept of a climax ecosystem, which is that you can design, using permaculture principles, to produce the most fecund, the most thriving, the most biodiverse, the most productive and generative ecosystem scale using permaculture design. We happen to have a name for that, we call it a food forest, which is a bit misleading. because it's about a hell of a lot more than food. The one I experienced in Costa Rica, but all the medicine you need, you just have to know which plant leaf to pull. And all the textiles you need, you have to know which ones make paper, which ones make baskets, which ones make poison darts, and so on and so forth. What's amazing is if you come from an agricultural system like most of us do, and you walk through a climax ecosystem, like the food forests of Central and South America, you don't see them. All you see is jungle. Because you don't have the cultural knowledge to know how to be and live in that environment, which is why how to live in this place, the cultural identity, is what makes it a bioregion. So we have this ability right now to look at planetary scale problems. Climate change, ocean acidification, sea level rise, loss of biodiversity, these problems that are so big, we're like, what the hell can a little person like me do? Well, the answer is, you by yourself, not very much. You organize cooperatively around the functions of a landscape, have the power of the Earth's regeneration. You really have the power of Gaia, because you are Gaia. You are the enactment of those living systems. And so this idea of regenerative design has scales. The problem right now is when we look at permaculture farms and projects, they're too small. Not because of their own fault, but because the scale of achieving robust circulation is the bioregion. So we have work to do building up to that scale all over the planet.
And the good news is that that's easier to happen as things collapse.
Yeah, a lot of stuff's going to get out of our way.
Change is much more difficult when things are still going okay, or there's the illusion things are going okay. As things break down, as they break down faster, believe it or not, people are ready to shift their worldviews a lot more, and people are willing to shift their behaviors, and it's amazing how much can happen in a relatively short period of time as things contract. They're positive. Again, it's not going to save industrialism from hitting the wall or going off the cliff or whatever you want to say, but it's planting seeds and building community so that we can genuinely thrive even in profoundly difficult, challenging times.
So one thing that's interesting about regeneration is if I have stage 4 cancer and my system is all messed up, it's still regenerative because I'm still not dead. I'm still alive. So even in the most broken and destructive cultures, you can find regeneration. I had this amazing experience where my wife and daughter and I traveled for 10 days in Guatemala. After spending time in Costa Rica, and we went back to Costa Rica and we looked at the difference. In Guatemala, all the cities are full of garbage, and inequality is really high. There are drug cartels and lots of violence, and a really rich and in-your-face, beautiful Mayan culture all around you. The living people and the ruins and all of it. You go to Costa Rica, you have pristine, clean rivers, and no military at all. They abolished it in 1948. And you have an ecological mindset, and you have less inequality. And you're like, oh, this is interesting. One of them's regenerative, Costa Rica. The other one's not, Guatemala. No, it's not right. Guatemala is regenerative too. There are life processes going on. So if we look in the United States, what are some of the life processes that are going on? One of the beautiful things about the protest movements, people going out in the streets, is no one knows their neighbors. No one has friends anymore. We're all fragmented, overworked. If you ever read the book Bowling Alone, we took all the fabric of communities and destroyed it decades ago. And now people are reconnecting in crisis, which is a pulse of regenerative culture. The ability to form social connections. Anyone who lives close to their parents, so their parents can help with childcare, that is regenerative. Tried and true practices. The nuclear family was the biggest social experiment of the modern era, and it's deeply destructive. So we have these capacities of regeneration. There are lots of them. But what we have to do is practice being human. So if you go from being inside your house to get in your car, go in your car, inside an office building, never outdoors, never talking to anyone, sit in a cubicle, you have very little opportunity to practice the nascent regenerative capacities of your culture. Strike up a conversation at the cash register at the grocery store. Take a walk outside and meet your neighbors. Start a garden in your front yard right by the sidewalk and start talking to people walking their dogs, and you're going to discover a lot of regenerative capacities in your culture. All around us is just so small and fragmented, and we're so overwhelmed by all of the stress and threat signals our bodies are giving off. Or, wait a second. Another minute. See the problem? We have to disconnect from our disconnection and reconnect with each other.
Say that again.
You have to disconnect from your disconnection, and we have to reconnect to each other. And you will find regeneration all around you, because we are a culmination of adaptations that evolution has given for 3.8 billion years, many of them built into our complex bodies and our social structures, that we naturally do. Like when we see a baby in distress, most of us, psychopaths and sociopaths may be forgiven, may not reach out to care for them, but most of us will. We have a deep capacity for human connection. And that's where our regenerative culture resides.
Just building on that just a second, one of the things that John Michael Brewer, I mentioned him this morning, that one of his books is called Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush. Well, he also talks about one of the things that we can do, based on just what you said, like getting away, is we can all think of it as LESS. We can all get used to and adapt to less energy, less stuff, and less stimulation. And simply by making a choice tomorrow morning to use less energy, less stuff, and less stimulation, to make some choice in your life along those lines that your ancestors would be proud of and future generations will be grateful for. It's a good thing, and it puts you in that place of being able to then respond to some of the deep, unconscious regenerative capacities within us, evolutionarily and culturally, because we're not being distracted by stuff, stimulation, and energy.
So what I want to close with is your invitation to find the piece of this planet that if you give your love to that piece of the planet, heal that piece of the earth, that you would be perfectly happy to become compost on that piece of the earth. That your blood would spill into that soil, your bones would return, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, except not dust. Microbial bacteria-rich, mycelial-rich, vibrant soil. This is an invitation to become sacred enactment of the earth. So that's what I leave you with tonight.
Just several nights ago, I did a program on Whidbey Island, and Rob Lewis came and gave me a copy of his book. I pulled it out this morning and started reading it. I was like, whoa, dude, this is good. So I want to conclude because I see Rob here. He showed up tonight. So Rob, stand up. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So much of my work is about calling us home as a species, the prodigal species. Yes, we squandered our inheritance, but we're waking up to our predicament. In the pig pen, as it were, and we're coming home to reality, whether we mythologize it as God or not, but we're coming home to reality. And this is called the return. Place a Bible, a Quran, and a Torah beside each other in a field, not one higher nor lower than the other, and according to no order that you could intend. Then walk away. Let the high summer grasses close behind you. Autumn rains come, and the washings of time. Small needs of mice and robins shred pages into nests. Partial psalms disappear into burrows. Torn parables and sutras are winged to branches. And like this, the sacred words spread through a circling woods like widening rings on a lake. In the leather covers, the ground recognizes its own. The meal is glad, gradual. There is no gluttony here. Everything passes into new beauty. And you did not walk away. You returned.